A new article posted at 9 a.m. By Variety, who have allegedly a variety of content. They posted this: making The Last of Us Season 2, casting Abby, video game changes, and why the creators are at peace with telling a different version of the story. Buckling in, here we go. I have been intrigued with some of the rumors and stuff we've heard about season 2. Season 1, of course, like fudged the timelines a little bit. They might add a little bit of stuff here, take away stuff over here. Was it episode 3? It was like episode 3 or 5 that they just, it was with Bill, and they just wrote a whole new story, and tweaked a ton of stuff with it. And I thought it worked really well, but they definitely are willing to fudge the timeline a bit, fudge the story a bit to rework it for television, which, to be clear, I'm okay with. Okay? I know some people are going to be like, oh no, you got to be a purist. I'm okay, because video games are a totally different medium than TV, which is why I love video games, to be fair. But it means that you can't tell stories the same way on TV as you could in a video game. In a video game, they'll do stuff like having, an hour's worth of puzzles that you're doing with an NPC, and it's designed to try and get you to bond with the NPC with little bits of dialogue that are playing back and forth. It's also to pad gameplay time, but it's also like building a relationship with that character passively, which is something video games can do that almost no other medium can do, is to get you to bond with somebody without you realizing that you're bonding with them through gameplay. In TV, they have to get you to bond with that character in about 20 minutes of you just watching something. And that's a much taller order. So it's much more difficult, I think, to try and take a video game into a TV show than a TV show into a video game, for example, in my opinion. So they're gonna have to fudge some stuff, because frankly, in my opinion, I think some of the ways that they set up The Last of Us Part 2 for the video game wouldn't translate to a TV show very well. One of the biggest and most obvious things I'm curious about is, like, are they going to do the same split? So are they gonna do like Ellie for half the season and then Abby for the second half, and then have them together for the finale? I don't know if it's been confirmed. We'll see when they describe this. I don't think it's confirmed, at least, that season 2 will just be the second game. I think that there's a strong possibility season 2 only goes through like half of the second game or something. So we'll see. But let's see what they say. Let's read through it. Let's check it out. Okay. Let's check it out. Let me just turn that off, because I don't need two duplicates of it. On July 3rd, 2019, Neil Druckmann first said those fateful words to Craig Mazin inside Santa Monica offices of Naughty Dog, the developer behind the 2013 blockbuster Last of Us game. As the game's writer and creative director, Druckmann was the lead architect of its astonishing story and grief and trauma amid a zombie apocalypse. Mazin, whose gripping limited series Chernobyl had just concluded on HBO, revered the game and had come to Naughty Dog to persuade Druckmann to adapt it for television with him. But when Druckmann picked up a PlayStation controller during that first meeting, it wasn't so he and Mazin could discuss one of the game's fight sequences involving marauding hordes of infected, nor was it to watch one of the many poignant scenes featuring its two protagonists, Joel, a hard-hearted smuggler, and Ellie, a headstrong teenager immune to the fungal pandemic that decimated the planet. Instead, Druckmann, in a display of immediate trust, showed Mazin a scene between Joel and Ellie from the game's top secret sequel, The Last of Us Part 2, nearly a year before it would be made available to the public. It's just the golf scene, wasn't it? It's like, yeah, you sure you still want to do the show? Are you sure? You sure? Because this is what you're getting into. Buckle up, buckaroo. As it turned out, Druckmann didn't need any convincing about doing a show. Within a week, they were pitching the first season of The Last of Us to HBO. Their easy rapport was apparently, even as their easy rapport is apparent, even as Mazin and Druckmann sit in one of Naughty Dog's austere conference rooms, part of what Mazin affectionately calls this concrete palace, to discuss the show's second season ahead of their South by Southwest panel with the cast. Season 2 will premiere on April 13th, to be clear. Mazin brags that he got to play part 2 himself as they wrote season 1. It was awesome, one of the countless examples of the bond they cultivated in those early months. I will say initially, like, the idea that it's somewhat surprising, because this kind of implies it's surprising that Neil was so immediately into the idea of The Last of Us, like, on HBO. to me, it's kind of like, no duh. One of the complaints some people have about The Last of Us and Naughty Dog games is that they kind of want to be movies, but because they're so cinematic and so high in production quality that they kind of come off as movies that are also video games, you know? So to me, it's not surprising at all that he really loved the idea of doing an HBO show. To him, I'm sure that was a dream come true. So I'm sure he's like all into it. That bond has bloomed into a creative partnership that has redefined what's possible for video game adaptations, a genre formerly as synonymous with prestige drama as fast food is with fine dining. This is true. I mean, it's something for us to keep in mind nowadays because we're kind of used to it. But back in the day, video games were seen as like an extension of children's toys, okay? It's still something we even see today to a certain extent, where the people they promote into executive positions within like Warner Brothers games or EA or Take-Two, a lot of those executives are former like toy company executives. I forgot which company it was exactly, but one of the like founding and most important people for Xbox during the Xbox One era had a background with like Hasbro, because the approach and attitude was always video games are basically just toys for children. And that was the whole attitude. That's how they looked at it. So nowadays we think of video games as being much more mainstream, having much broader cultural influence and impact, but they didn't start that way. I mean, it really, really didn't start that way. I remember watching I wonder if I can find it real quick, an interview with Todd Howard. Here. This is what I was talking about. Thank you. Who got that right? Who got that? Was it Rabid Wolf? Yeah, Rabid Wolf. Shout out Rabid Wolf for knowing exactly what I was talking about. Look at this, okay? I wasn't making it up, okay? Real talk. Look here, listen. There we go. He's so young.
This is great. Look at this. You all came. This is amazing. I need to let me take this in. Holy crap. You know, when I first started at Bethesda 21 years ago, yes, believe it or not, there was no E3. There was none of this. You remember that? We had CES in Vegas, and the video games weren't even in.
Oh, is that CES, not E3? It was pre-E3. So at CES.
There was none of this. You remember that? We had CES in Vegas, and the video games weren't even in the main building. They were in like an ancillary tent with the porn. I'm not kidding.
That's how they used to be viewed, man. Video games back in the day were not taken seriously at all. And so now seeing like HBO adaptations that are winning tons of awards and stuff based on video games is impressive. Because like even The Witcher, I mean, imagine if the Witcher Netflix show ended up like actually continuing to like be good and stuff. But like even The Witcher, if you were pointing to that, it's like, well, it's based on books and the games were based on the books, but the show is kind of based on the books and not the games. And so it's kind of roundabout. But with this, it's like literally a show based on a video game, and that's it. It's crazy. It's crazy. Continuing on. On The Last of Us, Mazine and Druckmann struck a rare balance between visceral action and nuanced storytelling that enthralled gamers and civilians alike. While Joel and Ellie's odyssey through a landscape ravaged by a global pathogen hit audiences right where they'd been living for the past 3 years, after its January 2023 premiere, The Last of Us joined Game of Thrones and Squid Game as one of the few hugely popular series that are also critical and award season darlings. It averaged nearly 32 million viewers across the first 90 days across all HBO platforms and garnered 24 Emmy nominations for its first season, including for drama, actor for Pedro Pascal and actress Bella Ramsey, and wins for guest actors such as Nick Offerman and Storm Reed. But Mazine and Druckmann knew that making season 2 would be a far more daunting endeavor. Along with the usual pressures of following an overnight smash, part 2 upends fundamental things fans loved about the first game. It alienates Joel and Ellie from each other, pushes the story to jaw-dropping extremes, and forces players to empathize with by playing as the game's central antagonist, Abby, who will be played by dope-sick Emmy nominee Caitlin Dever. While Part 2 was lauded as one of the best games ever made when it debuted in June of 2020, its provocations also caused a cascade of online fan fury that still percolates. On top of all of that, Part 2 is such a colossal experience, taking almost twice as long to complete as Part 1, that adapting it would necessitate telling the story over multiple seasons. Oh, boom. Okay, there you go. That pretty much confirms it. Okay, so they're doing multiple seasons. Maybe they've talked about that before. I just haven't seen it. But okay, Part 2, multiple seasons. How do they break it up? I don't know. What's your predictions? What's your predictions for how they break it up? Do they break it up like Literally, when like Abby comes to the theater, basically the midpoint of the game, and then season 3 is just Abby. I don't know how that works though. I don't know how that works, because the danger with all this, and it's the danger like literally Naughty Dog ran into with The Last of Us Part 2, is that people will play the game. They will get to the Abby part and people will put down the controller and walk away. A friend of mine did that. Played The Last of Us Part 2, got to the part where it prompted him to start playing as Abby, and he's like, no, I'm good. And walked away and like didn't touch it again. And I mean, it says a lot about the bond that was created between players and Joel, for example, that they have such a strong bond and allegiance to that character. The idea of playing as his killer is just not interesting. I don't know. It's gonna be interesting to see where they go with it. Because my fear would just be if they try to split it like the game halfway through, and then season 3 is just following Abby. I'm not sure that works, because it'll feel like a different show. I mean, or a spin-off show, basically. So I think you have to keep some of the main cast there, and you got to shake it up a little bit more, but I'm not sure. What kind of idiot stops playing a game they paid for because they're too upset about their favorite character dying? Somebody that bought it before it launched and was like, I'm gonna play this, I'm gonna give it a shot, and then they got halfway through it and they're like, I'm good. I'm not saying it was the most rational decision they made, but it was one they made. I left the game after he tried to tell me that Joel was wrong with saving Ellie in the first game. I mean, I get what you mean. I'm not sure if they said he was wrong for saving her. They just said, like, can we acknowledge that what he did was very selfish and literally not even something that Ellie wanted him to do, which I think jives with the first game's writing as well. That didn't seem that out of pocket for me. But like the thing with The Last of Us Part 2 that frustrated a lot of people is that like everybody knew what they were doing. Everybody knows they get the premise, like, oh, it's all about perspective. If you look at it from this perspective, Joel's the bad guy. And if you look at it from this perspective, Abby's crew are the bad guys. But it's all about perspective and forming a rainbow. And I do think that is a valid story to tell. And I think that's an interesting story to tell. And I think The Last of Us Part 2 in terms of like gameplay and technology and all these other aspects is a masterpiece in many ways. But I still insist The Last of Us's idea, the story, the theme could have been way, way better executed and way more, I think, appreciated if it were with different characters. I think if it was an original IP or something and it was just totally fresh and different and people didn't have the attachment to Joel that they started with, I think they could have achieved the same goal without all the drama of like, how dare you kill Joel? You know, I think that they could have had more success with actually communicating what they were trying to communicate with a different IP, because I mean, quite obviously it stirred up drama that's still present today, but still. Amadeus, I think you've touched on this, Luke, but the entire thing about The Last of Us Part 2 is that if you buy the Joel made a questionable decision, it works. If you don't agree, it simply doesn't work as a concept. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're right. Quite obviously, the whole premise of the game is that like, hey, Joel went in and killed this doctor that he didn't need to kill, which is sort of like a miniature allegory of the entire game. Joel killed a lot of people he probably didn't need to kill, but it was to protect the person he cared about and loved. And then it's like, flip that around. So Joel is killing all these people and doing these bad things for somebody that he cares about. But if you're looking at it from the outside, it just looks like he's killing tons of people, or that he doesn't care about the greater good, which is also why I think one of the other premises that The Last of Us Part 2 hinges on is the idea that the Fireflies were actually going to create a cure, a vaccine or whatever it would have been for the cordyceps fungus. So I think if you buy that they were about to actually make the cure, and then Joel basically damns humanity to save one person, then the premise of the second game really clicks and makes sense. The problem is, I think when they wrote the first game, they weren't planning on that. They wanted to make it a little bit more ambiguous. So the Fireflies come off as just like total idiots, and it wasn't clear based on some of the vocal recordings if they were actually going to be successful in creating a cure, in which case it's like, yeah, so Joel didn't want to risk losing the only person he cared about to like maybe find a cure. And so they grade it out a little bit. And I'm guessing for season 2, they make it way more clear. They're like, oh no, the Fireflies were going to make a cure. They can do it. They've just been waiting for somebody like Ellie, and now they can do it. I think that's the thing they're going to really shift, is they're going to make it locked down very clear. So yeah, I think that's the key. Moving on, where was I? Okay, none of that fazed Mazin. If anything, it made him more eager to get to work. Quote, one of the notes that I resent most is, we loved this thing. More of it, please, he says. No, you loved it because that's the right amount of it. When you do more, what makes it special starts to dissipate. It becomes comfort food. And there's one thing about The Last of Us. If there's one thing about The Last of Us, it is not comfortable. I would agree. The Last of Us as a franchise, then also The Last of Us Part 2 especially, I don't think they're fun. And this is something Neil Druckmann's talked about, where he's like, yeah, I don't know if our games are fun, but I don't think they need to be. And I think that is true. Not all video games need to be fun, whatever that is. When I think of fun, I think of like, ooh, this is engaging and I have a smile on my face, you know? The Last of Us Part 2 is kind of like a marathon of misery, I think is what I've called it before. It is tough to play. It is emotionally draining. By the time it's over, you're like, thank God, Howard, this is over. And that's why I do not blame people if they're like, I can't stand it and it's miserable. I don't blame you. Like Monster Hunter, I think that's fun. Split Fiction, I think is fun. It Takes Two, I think is fun. Pirate Yakuza, yeah, that's fun. GTA can be really fun. The Last of Us Part 2 and like some of these more narrative games are much less about fun and they're more about the story. And it's true of other things like movies. Like, would anybody say that like Schindler's List is fun? I hope not. If you think that movie's fun, I've got questions. But that's not what it's not trying to be fun. You know, that's not what it's doing. It shouldn't be seen as fun. It's trying to do something else, tell a broader story that's more impactful. So I think the dismissal of a video game because it's not fun kind of misses the point of what it's trying to do, you know? Uncharted was fun too. Yeah, I think Uncharted's fun. It's just so much of it is about where you are or what you're trying to do. And I think that's true of a lot of games. I think you got to be very careful not to critique or bash a game for not being what you very specifically wanted it to be. You know, like if you want, well, maybe like Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
That's a game that is not trying to be AC1. You know, it's not trying to be a social stealth game. It's trying to be like a smash and grab Viking simulator with some light RPG stuff. Like that's what it's trying to be. And my point is, like, even when you review it and look at it based on that, what they were trying to do, I still think it's not very good at that, which is why I've called it a travesty of open world design. Like, I think even as what it's trying to be, it wasn't successful. But to dismiss that game because of the fact it's not the stealth game, or like it has bad stealth. Like, yeah, well, I mean, clearly they didn't want there to be stealth. Like, it was very low on the priority list. They weren't trying to do that. So I think you got to analyze the game and critique it based on what it's trying to be. And The Last of Us, I certainly agree, is not comfortable. I don't think it's fun. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but I think that changes the lens through which you have to look at it, in my opinion. Continuing on, Druckmann leans forward, turning a thought around in his head. I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, he says, but I think you have to have a certain level of success to have confidence to do what we're doing, both in the game and in the show, because on paper it looks so risky. But this is where I love working with Craig, because he thinks like me. Sometimes you have a feeling the story has to be this and only this. You just have to commit. Mazin turns to Druckmann. If there's one thing that you and I share, we have no problem going all in. Sometimes you just have to move all your narrative chips into the middle and say, F it, we're going to do it. We'll do it live. During the 6-month production on season 2, largely in British Columbia, Mazin regularly checked in with Ramsey, Bella Ramsey, who plays Ellie, to ensure the then 20-year-old was physically okay enough following a day of intense stunt sequences. I feel like if Bella broke her leg in the middle of the day, she wouldn't tell me until the next day. I also know that there's nothing I could write that she would say, oh, I'm scared to do that. When I relay Mazin's observations to Ramsey, who uses both she, her, and they, them pronouns, they break into a smile, but Mazin's notion that absolutely nothing would rattle them is, Ramsey says, only half accurate. Quote, I'm scared of some of the bigger emotional scenes, leaving not satisfied with my performance, Ramsey says, to cope before the really dark scenes. I try to make myself as light and energetic as possible for what Ramsey calls, quote unquote, the darkest scene in this season. For example, they listen to on loop to the Buckwheat Boys classic Peanut Butter Jelly Time. That is a choice. I was on the floor, my eyes absolutely burning with these menthol tears, and I'm just saying, peanut butter jelly, peanut. Okay, you'll probably be able to tell which one that is when you watch it. That's a newer technique. I don't really know what to say. The menthol tear thing, I will say, I've done a lot of like I did acting classes all through college. I performed in like plays and musicals and stuff. Had the pleasure of working with some very talented actors here in Colorado, some of which have like retired from New York, came back. My favorite guy I ever got to work with, Jonathan Farwell. He was actually on Star Trek back in the day. We did a play together called On Golden Pond. It was a great time. I've worked with some amazing actors and actresses. It's a great time. The menthol thing is widely regarded as like a cheat because it kind of is. You basically like, they have these like menthol sticks, and you like rub it on the underside of your eye and it makes your eyes water so that it looks like you're crying and the tears come. I think that's what they're like, what Bella's referring to. And it's funny because like even in smaller productions and theaters, using those types of things to generate tears is seen as like cheating and like you're a hack basically, because it's like, those aren't real tears. Those aren't real tears. It's like if you took onions and you rubbed them all over your eyes and then your eyes are watering and it's like, I'm so sad. You know, that's basically what's happening here. So it's just funny to hear that they're using menthol on the set of The Last of Us Part 2. But anyway, that's just a separate issue, which it's funny because like even in small theaters that I've worked in, it's viewed as like, you need menthol to like get tears flowing. Oh, okay. I just thought you were like serious about that. Okay. Like actors are really, really bitchy about it. Okay. It's just funny. Where was I? Even though anyone who's played part 2 or just read its Wikipedia page knows which scene Ramsey is likely talking about. And this is one thing I will give credit for. I'm sure if you have to be sobbing on the floor for like 4.5, 5 hours while they film you nonstop from 5 different angles, I'm sure it does get a little tiring, and maybe you do need a little bit of like something to help the tears flow, or at least make it look like you're crying. But yeah, I don't know. Crying on command is hard. It is, but that's why actors and actresses are so scary, dude. This is a class of people that are largely able to make themselves cry and sob on cue in the split of a second. If that doesn't horrify you, I don't know what will. Like, that's terrifying that somebody could do that, could swing to that other emotion. And the people who are good at it, you know, it's believable. It's like, oh my God, think of depressing stuff and you'll nail it. That's the thing, Lilu. Some actors and actresses have to do that. Like, they have to go to a mental space. They remember when their dog died when they were a kid. They remember this or that. Yeah, they see their gas bill and they cry. Others can just do it. One girl who was in an acting class with me in college, she could just like in an instant sobbing. It was like a muscle control thing. She could just contort her face in the right way to get the tears flowing, and it was totally believable. But she didn't have to like go anywhere. She just had the control of whatever that is to get there instantly. And I was like, imagine trying to have a conversation with that person, and they just, because like they know that they can turn it on. And so like when they really want something, they can just like manipulate you like that and just immediately start sobbing. It's like in a TV show where they're just like, thanks. And then they just continue on their day. There are people who can do that, and it's scary. Okay. Anyway, this is good luck, Jacob, with this stream clip. Keep it all in. You know what? Don't cut it. We're keeping it all. We'll do it live. Brian Cranston pictured his daughter dying to film a scene in Breaking Bad. I mean, that's hardcore. That's hardcore. And it's probably because he's not a psychopath. I think some actors and actresses are just straight up psychopaths, which is why they can just to go crazy. Anyway, there are things where we don't have the element of surprise, perhaps the way the games did. I mean, unfortunately, the game's leaked, which kind of removed the element of surprise. But I have thought about that. Like, what would The Last of Us Part 2 have been like if it hadn't leaked? If all that, like all that drama, if all that stuff had not leaked, would it have changed the discourse of the game at all? Or would it have just ended up being the exact same, but just delayed by a week? And I'm honestly not sure. I'm not sure. Because part of the leaks included information that was just false. It was just false. It was like, for example, they said that Abby was trans and that they had put a trans character in the game to kill Joel and then force you to play as that character and show you that the character was actually the good guy all along. But that's like, they sort of like try to imply that maybe Abby was right all along, but like Abby's not trans. Like she's just not. And so that riled up a certain type of person, let's just say, but obviously like that was not true. And if you played the game, you know that's not true. But even now I have people in the comment section of videos and stuff, whenever we talk about The Last of Us Part 2, that bring that up and try to say that like Abby was trans, and they just don't know because they remember the initial leak and they never played the game, and that's it, you know? So I think it's interesting to ponder what could have happened or how things might have been different if the leaks hadn't happened. But yeah, apparently the leaks, I think they said in that making of The Last of Us Part 2 documentary, they said that the leaks came from like a disgruntled fan who got access to their servers and stuff through the back end and were leaking stuff to try and force them to release it. Because if you don't remember, this is a throwback. The Last of Us Part 2 was supposed to launch like right as COVID broke out, but they ended up actually delaying it indefinitely during that period because they didn't know, like, is this whole thing going to be over in a month? Is it over in 6 months, a year? What are we going to do? So The Last of Us Part 2 was basically done, but they just delayed it indefinitely and there was no release date given, which is very rare. I mean, to see a video game that's like months away from launch or even a month away from launch, however close it was when they delayed it, and then to just hear, yeah, it's postponed indefinitely. That's very, very, very rare. I can't think of another time a game has just been postponed indefinitely. But I mean, we have gotten delays that go from a specific date to sometime in the future, you know. But when the leaks hit, apparently, you know, what Neil said in that documentary was they found the person that did it, and that person was trying to force them to release the game by leaking stuff. That's at least what they had confessed to. I don't know. It's crazy. Maybe not the most well-adjusted person to do that type of thing, to break into a company's servers and then leak it to try and get them to put out a video game, but whatever. A lot of people who played the first game understood that Joel's daughter was going to die very quickly in the first episode. Those people weren't surprised. They felt it because it's the journey. That's true. That's true. And I do think that there are going to be a lot of people who watch the second season of the show or third season, whatever, who don't know that they don't know Joel's fate. And it probably will come as a surprise. So of course, like it could get leaked or not leaked, spoiled for them online. But, you know, I do think that there's the potential for surprises still. But anyway, even if the showrunners stayed faithful to the second game's signature twist, they also still introduce some significant changes. Variety can report exclusively, here we go, that ubiquitous actor Joe Pantoliano will play Eugene, a Part 2 character who players only hear about in the game when Ellie and her friend Dina, played by Isabel Merced, I don't know, find his abandoned cannabis den. Similar to Season 1's beloved Bill and Frank's standalone episode, Mazine saw the foregrounding of Eugene as another chance to expand the story's scope beyond the game. Who is this? Do I know this guy? So he's in the Matrix and he's gonna play like the guy that was growing a bunch of weed. Okay. I mean, doesn't really surprise me. One of the other things I'm curious, they have a section of The Last of Us Part 2 that was cut where we actually get to meet Joel's girlfriend, because he had a girlfriend that was written into it, but she lived outside of Jackson. And eventually the idea was that Joel and Ellie are going to meet her and like just interact with her during one of those like flashback sequences, and that she was going to get bitten during like a raid or something, or I don't know, an uptick in activity with infected. And then Ellie would be sent outside. Joel would stay inside with his girlfriend, and you would hear a gunshot, and then Joel just walks out after, you know, his girlfriend's been bitten and infected. So the question is, like, did Joel do it? Did she do it? Did they just say goodbye? Like, how did that work? We don't know. But they cut it because they felt like it kind of killed. It introduced another variable, which was the secondary character that you only got to see a little bit. And so they ended up cutting it from The Last of Us Part 2. But they might bring that back during the show, especially if they're going to be like, hey, we got 3 seasons for Part 2. Let's throw in a ton of extra stuff. I mean, they could fill it out with that. They could have an entire episode of just Joel and his girlfriend, for all we know. Druckmann loved the idea. I get excited when I see these opportunities. I'm like, ooh, I don't know Eugene that well. The story we told in the game was somewhat superficial. The way this character comes in really gets to the heart of Joel and Ellie and their relationship. 6 years and 1 real-life pandemic later, Mazin still marvels at how willing, even eager, Druckmann has been to deconstruct a story he's devoted so much of himself to bringing to life. You are unique in this way, and I'm deeply grateful for it, Mazin said to Druckmann before turning back to me. He understands the value of invention, reinterpretation, addition, change. Then to Druckmann, you always say you want to deliver whatever will make the best show. Druckmann shrugs. I enjoy a good brainstorm. Do you think this takes away from his efforts within Naughty Dog? Because, I mean, he spent a lot of time working on this. He's even directed episodes and stuff. So do you think it takes away from, like, his ability to work on and supervise their next game? Remember Bruce Straley? Yeah, Bruce, he was like the guy that ran all the gameplay stuff for Uncharted 4. And after Uncharted 4, he was like, I am so freaking burnt out. He's like, I am miserable. And left. I mean, this is allegedly, like, also a narrative game. I don't know. It feels very like knockoff Guardians of the Galaxy, but we'll see. Oh, we're gonna get copyright struck for that. I don't know, man. I don't know. It does make me wonder if all this work that he's doing on this stuff, if it interferes with the other stuff that they're trying to do. Because, I mean, he only has so much time, and he's the head honcho. I mean, obviously Naughty Dog's a big company and a very capable studio, but it does make you wonder. But who knows? Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe Neil not being there much ends up helping, for all we know. The men are a textbook study in contrast, where Mazin 53 is voluble, demonstrative, and unabashedly neurotic. Druckmann 46 can be sphinx-like in his measured calm, but they share an abiding confidence in their own storytelling instincts and each other's, like casting Catherine O'Hara as Joel's therapist in Jackson, Wyoming community, where in the Jackson Wyoming community, where Joel and Ellie have lived for 5 years since the events of The Last of Us Season 1 finale, something Mazin has wanted to do from the start. There was a scene early in Season 1 where Joel met with a therapist in the QZ in Boston, Pascal says via email. I found it a beautiful way into the character and the walls that are guarding his traumas and losses. The scene was ultimately cut before Pascal got to shoot it, and he said, quote, and he was like, that's half the reason I'm here, Mazin recalls. But the showrunner always intended to return to the idea for Season 2. Therapy is a fantastic mirror to say not just who are you really, or what are you really thinking, but people, I can't read, but what people are refusing to talk about. This is also one of those things that you kind of can do in a show. If you did it in a video game, it would feel really weird having a character like Joel sit for a therapy session. It would be like, what are we doing? But it's because, like, again, you have to think of how, if you're a writer and you're writing a game versus a show, how do we get into the mind of Joel? How do we tell the audience what Joel's thinking? And you can just have them sit down next to a therapist and the therapist says, what are you thinking? And then they read off what they're thinking. Or you can try something a little bit more dynamic, and maybe you explore a level and then Joel opens up and is kind of talking to himself about what he's thinking. Or maybe he goes on a walk with his dog and he talks to his dog about his frustrations and emotions, or his horse or whatever. Even in like Red Dead Redemption 2, you have sequences where Arthur is talking to his horse. You know, he might make an offhand comment about how Dutch is pissing him off to his horse. But that's a little thing that you can do to just give the audience a little glimpse at how they're thinking and what's going on. So I do think having a sequence with like a therapist, especially Catherine O'Hara, is fantastic. She's hilarious. I think that could be really interesting to see how that plays out. Let's see. They also embrace the deep estrangement between Joel and Ellie that opens part 2, a divide that Pascal says was painful to experience. While Bella and I are forever joined, to not have them near me for every part of season 2 felt like a cruel separation. Good for my codependent nature, bad for my heart. It felt like Ellie maturing and growing up, Ramsey says of the split. Me and Pedro were with each other literally through everything all the time the whole first season. This season was much more of an isolated one for Ellie. It was a lonelier experience, but I don't say that in a negative way. It's only when I bring up the character of Abby that Mazine and Druckmann evince any apprehension about the changes they've made between the game and the show. The character is much more muscular in part 2 than Deaver is in season 2, with the violence markedly cut down from the game. The showrunners say the need for Abby to be so imposing wasn't as critical. So this is something that they've talked about a few times. Obviously, like, this does not match the Abby in the game, who is like roided out Brock Lesnar. I do want to say, people who were like, Abby's physique totally unrealistic. Have you seen Brock Lesnar's daughter? She actually goes to my alma mater. She goes to CSU. So she's like not that far away, like a 5-10 minute drive away. But like, his daughter is a tank. People joke that it's just Brock Lesnar in a wig, but I mean, you see Brock Lesnar and then you see his daughter. It's like, oh yeah, makes sense. You know, some Viking genetics for sure. But the point is, like, this is not what you see in The Last of Us Part 2. Like, this physique is much more in line with what you would expect from Abby in the game. Just, you know, shredded. Not even shredded, because I think shredded has to do with, like, how toned you are and conditioned you are. More, what's the term if you're just big? Just, hulking? I don't know. Anyway, it's literally not important, to be fair. But they've intentionally gone with like this more normal physique for Abby. And they say it's not as important. What Neil has said is that in the game, it was important that Abby have the bigger physique because Abby needed to play differently than Ellie, needed to be much more melee focused, much more violent and bulky, beefy, swole. Yeah, maybe swole is what I'm thinking. Anyway, so they said that they didn't need to do that with the show because in the show, they don't have to give the player a controller and have them bash zombies over the head with a hammer or beloved characters with a base or with a golf club. And so they didn't really need to do that as much because they could rely more on like weapons, like guns and things, which maybe are more practical given the situation. But I do think it's going to potentially change how they frame things because, I mean, Caitlin Deaver seems like a fairly petite individual and Pedro is not a petite individual. It kind of made sense with Abby in the game beating him with a golf club because it's like, yeah, seems like the weapon of choice for a swole individual like Abby. But with Caitlin Deaver's version of Abby, I'm really curious if they change the golf club bit. They might change it to just like a katana or something, you know? Imagine if that cabin that they end up in was owned in the show. They change it so it's owned by like some like weeb crazed anime fan, and it's just like he's got all sorts of swords and things on the walls. She goes and takes out a katana. Joel, your time has come, dude. I 10 out of 10. I'd be here for that. But we'll see. They say that they've changed it because it wasn't needed. I also think just practically, it's because there's just not that many roided out actresses that could do this part in this age range. Like they could have gone to maybe WWE and found somebody who's just like, yeah, I'm Abby. Like they could have done that. Maybe hired Batista or something. Get John Cena to do it, put on a wig, maybe some lipstick. But they decided against it. And we'll see how it plays because it's definitely very different. In the game, it kind of jived with the meme of Neil Druckmann, which is that he likes, I think I saw an article. I forget who wrote it, but it was like an article titled something like Neil's love for muscle mommies. It was like, I can't believe I'm clicking on this click, but it's because Neil Druckmann in a bunch of the games he's headed up, he writes in these like female characters that are specifically like very buff, whether it's Nadine or in the last, or in Uncharted 4, and then in The Lost Legacy, and then also in The Last of Us Part 2 with Abby, being super swole. And it's like, oh, maybe Neil does like him some muscle mommies. Who knows? More power to you. No judgment. I think everybody secretly wants to have their head crushed like a watermelon between some thighs, but it's, most of us don't have the chance to write a video game and create that character to experience that. I get it. More importantly, Druckmann says, Caitlin Deaver wanted to work with us. We wanted to work with her. It's not worth passing it up to continue a search that might never bear fruit to find someone that matches that physicality. And I think this is the interesting bit, is that this is also kind of an acknowledgement of what I just outlined, which is that they could have kept looking, could have looked for somebody, from the WWE who's roided out, or if just find somebody like Brock Lesnar's daughter who's just naturally huge and cast them. But it ultimately, I think it shows that the physicality and what you look like is nowhere near as important as your acting chops and your ability to portray the character, which is refreshing. It's almost like, you should be cast based on your merit and not just purely based on your looks and stuff. People have bashed, for example, People have bashed, for example, Bella Ramsey because she doesn't look like Abby in the games. And for season 1, I thought that was really unfair. And ultimately, I think when we saw season 1, we saw why that wasn't fair, because she's, a very talented actress. Like Bella is, I think, a really good season 1 or part 1 Ellie. Season 2, we'll see, because obviously 5 years have passed, and based on the shots I've seen, Bella Ramsey still kind of looks 12 years old. So we'll see how it plays, but I don't know. But they anyway, they continue on. No matter who the showrunners cast as Abby, though, they were bound to spark controversy. The character's stacked physique and brutal story arc placed her at the center of a torrent of online vitriol when hackers leaked hours of footage from Part 2 in April of 2020. As Druckmann, his co-writer Haley Gross, and the voice actors and the team at Naughty Dog scrambled to get through COVID isolation to make the game's June release, and Druckmann continued to work on season 1, they were inundated with anti-Semitism, misogyny, homophobia, death threats to themselves and their families. I'm still amazed that in the middle of all of it, we would get on a Zoom call. We would talk about how to make this television show, Mazine says. And here he was like, okay, I'm compartmentalizing. That world goes away. Now we work on the show. I wouldn't have been able to get out of bed. I asked Druckmann how he managed through this crisis, and he said, not very well at the time, he says, sounding grim. I get hyperfixated on stuff, so when I'm alone and I have time to think, and worse, I have time to browse, that's when it gets the most dangerous. I'm starting to doubt myself. What if I did ruin it? What if I did make a piece of shit? It was a narrative that Mazine would not abide, Druckmann says. Craig was saying, who cares what they think? I'm telling you, this is awesome. Listen to me. And ultimately, to a certain extent, I can appreciate just trying to create a story that you believe in, even if the critics or people online are initially like, stop. Because I do think artists and writers should just do what they want to do, without fear of recourse or whatever. I think the tough thing with The Last of Us Part 2 specifically is that it did, whether you love it or not, and I love a lot of aspects of The Last of Us Part 2, to be clear, what we do know for a fact is that it did piss off a ton of fans who honestly did like The Last of Us Part 1 and hated what they did in Part 2. And that's something that you can't really argue with. Sure, there were people that also hated it that never played the first game and had no idea what they were doing and have never played Part 2 and, blah, blah, blah. But there definitely were a lot of fans of the first game who were turned off and pissed off by the second game. And to that extent, what makes it tough is how do you decipher who's the real fans and who's not, who to listen to and who not to, which is why it just turns into a cacophony of nonsense, before you before you get done with it. Because it's just like, it can be kind of tough to figure out who the real fans are and who's offering genuine critiques and thoughts and who is just trying to freak out and rage about stuff. It's like we talked a handful of weeks ago about that one YouTuber guy, or I think he's just on X, but it's one of those guys that just rages about culture war stuff and claims to be a gamer. And then he started raging and he made this post about Fable, and he's like, this article is really worrying. It says in Fable, you're able to wear a dress regardless of your character's sex. So clearly the game is going woke. And I'm saying this as a longtime fan of Fable. I love the original games. But the guy got baited and didn't realize the article he was posting was originally updated in like 2012. Like 2012. And it was about the first Fable game. It wasn't even about this one. And so he just like totally revealed himself to have no idea what he's talking about, you know? The problem is that like my frustration is when people start lying because they're not interested in what's true or real. They just want to further their team's fight within a culture war topic or issue. I think that that's just not helpful. And I think it can corrupt otherwise good discourse and useful discourse. And I think you see that in that example where it's like, this guy's claiming he has this opinion because he's a gamer and therefore his opinion should be valid because he's a gamer who liked the original games. He wouldn't just be saying this if it was just out of nowhere. And then he reveals to everybody he has no idea what he's talking about the original games. He doesn't actually care. He didn't even read the article he's reposting because if he did, he would have seen it was written over 10 years ago. You know? And so it's the definition of bad faith discourse. And you know, he ended up deleting the post because he got blown up and everybody like was making fun of him. But that's the problem is he deletes the post and he's just going to keep doing what he's been doing. You know, no, there's nothing that's going to happen other than us kind of calling it out and then making fun of it. No, it wasn't Grums. I think it was like I think it was Pirate something, Pirot or something like that. Continuing on. Okay, with Mazine's enthusiasm and pep talks, as well as the support of his inner circle, Druckmann thickened his skin to the point that he doesn't think any commensurate online hatred for Season 2 The Last of Us Part 2 would upset him. Quote, I love the changes that we've made. He says it's a different version of that story, but its DNA is in there. Maybe more than excited. I'm really curious what their reaction will be. They're framing it as like, not just we made some tweaks for the sake of telling the story, which is how they framed it in the Season 1 or Part 1 stuff. That, no, it wasn't Pirate Software. It was like, I don't know. It was Nation of Pirates or something like that. Anyway, with the first season, they framed a lot of the changes they were making specifically as we are making these tweaks and changes, but it's because we have to do this to make the story from the game fit into a TV show format, right? And that made sense to me. But this time around, they're framing it as we've made changes. It's a different version of that story, but the DNA is in there. When you're framing it as like the DNA is still there, I'm thinking of a much more substantial change. Because if you're tweaking something, yeah, no duh, the DNA is there. Like we put a little lipstick here, we put a little makeup there, we touch this up, a new shirt, but it's the same person. Yeah. When you have to specify, the DNA is still there. It makes me think you're doing much more significant changes, which is interesting. Imagine they didn't kill Joel off in the show. That would be insane. I'm starting to think there's a strong chance that they do something much more transformation. I mean, I think that they're going to be doing something like Joel doesn't die in Jackson, or maybe Tommy runs off because something happened in Seattle or something, and then he runs off to Seattle, so Joel and Ellie go off together initially. I don't know. I'm getting the feeling like they're going to be changing a lot more than, oh, instead of a golf club, it's a baseball bat now. Oh, instead of her beating him to death, she uses a gun. I think they're going to be doing something much more foundational because they're talking about it that way, but indirectly, you know. How much longer The Last of Us could continue, meanwhile, remains an open question. Mazine and Druckmann always planned to split Part 2 into more than one season. They're just not sure how many more seasons there will be. Quote, it feels like we've got 1 or 2 more seasons. It's getting harder to make because every episode gets big. You don't want to wait 4 years for a 17-episode finish or whatever it is. Then there's the long-whispered possibility of The Last of Us Part 3. Part 3. What's going to happen? This is the big moment. This is what's been going around social media. Part 3. I was waiting for this question, Druckmann says, sighing, when I bring up the prospect of a third game. He says, quote, I guess the only thing I would say is don't bet on there being more of Last of Us. This could be it. And this is interesting because this is flipped compared to what he's said at the end of that documentary, Grounded 2 or whatever, where he was like, I've been trying to find the next chapter in that story. It's like one of the very last things he says.
And for now years, I haven't been able to find that concept. But recently that's changed. And I don't have a story, but I do have that concept that to me is as exciting as 1, as exciting as 2, is its own thing, and yet has this through line for all 3. So it does feel like there's probably one more chapter to the story.
But now he's saying something a little bit different. Now he's saying, don't bet on there being more. Which maybe is just like, don't get your hopes up so when it happens, you're excited. Maybe that's what it is. Or maybe it's the more he's thought about it and worked on it, he's like, it's just not going to be worth the trouble. Who knows? Who knows? But I don't know. Dude, 1 HP voice. I have never heard that term, Doom of Sudan, but somehow I know exactly what you mean. The 1 HP voice. I kind of love that term. That's fantastic. That's so funny. It's like the lazy kind of, yeah, I think we're going to be doing this. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. That's clever. I like that. He just kill Ellie and Tommy. Yeah, that's the through line. He's like, what's the through line for all these stories? We kill everybody. Love it. And the theme is death. Death. You never know. No matter what the show's long-term prospects with a renewal all but guaranteed from HBO, Mazine and Druckmann will soon start their process all over again. We've been feeling scared lately about like, oh yeah, I have to start thinking about season 3. I remember having this feeling when we were finishing season 1 where I was like, how the F are we going to top this? Now, of course, I'm like, how the F are we going to top this? End quote. No comments yet. That's why you come to Luke Stevens Live, because we talk about stuff first. Right as the story breaks. I think realistically that last little bit that people are going on and on about with The Last of Us Part 3, I think realistically they eventually do it. I think that after Intergalactic Heretic Prophet, they do probably something different, something fresh. Maybe it's a sequel to Intergalactic, or maybe it's a new IP entirely, or they do something for Uncharted again, just as a throwback. Because at that point we'll probably be like, 15 years out from The Last of Us or from Uncharted 4, which is crazy to think about, but that's a strong possibility by the time we see the project after Intergalactic. So I think it's going to be a while before The Last of Us Part 3, if it ever happens. And even then, I think maybe the lesson with The Last of Us Part 2 is that sometimes stories are best left as is, and you just don't mess with it. You don't rock the boat, You just don't rock the boat. Not every Yoda needs a CGI counterpart. Not every, monster needs remastering. Like sometimes you can just leave it as is. Not every gun needs to be replaced with a radio. Sometimes you just gotta keep what you did as it was and as it is, and create something fresh and new. I think that's one of the takeaways. But perhaps the more cynical corporate way of looking at this is The Last of Us Part 2 sold millions by millions by millions of copies, and it generated discourse and hype for the franchise on a level never before seen for a video game of that scale. And then it led into an HBO show that was clearly massively popular. So even though The Last of Us Part 2 generated plenty of drama and discourse, can you really argue with the result? The franchise is bigger than it ever has been before. So maybe the soulless corporate way of looking at it is the drama still sold and it didn't really matter at the end of the day. Let me know your thoughts. But either way, in April, we're going to get to see The Last of Us Season 2. And I'm more intrigued after reading this, because I do think there's a strong possibility that they've changed a lot more than we initially thought.